Star Guide Ministry, Pastor Ajay Bediakon. Greetings to you in the name of our Father, Son, and Spirit, the three in one. We are moving on to the second section of the word we studied, agalliasis in the Greek, agalliasis, which we touched in the first section. We realized that the meaning is gladness, overjoy, exceeding joy, extreme joy, and it appears 5 times in the New Testament Greek Bible, out of which the Lucan author uses the word twice in his Gospel, in Luke chapter 1, verse 14, and also verse 44. We did it, and we examined the word agalliasis in other contexts, including Hebrews chapter 1, verse 9, Acts chapter 2, verse 46, and also the famous doxology, Jude 24. We found this word there. I also said, I reminded my listeners that the nearest Hebrew meaning, the nearest Hebrew word close to the meaning of agalliasis is simcha. That is the the Hebrew word nearest in meaning to agalliasis, which means overjoy, is simcha. Simcha. And I said that when you go home, read Esther chapter 8, verse 15 to 16, or read the entire story of Esther. I believe those of you who have read the story of Esther will understand me, because I'm not going to start from the scratch. Simcha is found in Esther, the book of Esther chapter 8, verse 15 to 16. When Mordecai left the king's presence, he was wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe, fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. Verse 16, for the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy and gladness and honor. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, that is simcha, which comes from the word simcha, and way means end. In addition to all the happiness, they had a joy flowing within their heart like a river. The biblical book of Esther in the Old Testament tells the story of how Purim festival was established. You know the Purim festival? It is a festive which commemorates God's deliverance of his established. It is a festive which commemorates God's deliverance of his people from their enemies. In other words, Purim is a festive that celebrates God for saving the Jews through Esther during the reign of King Xerxes in 486 BC to 465 BC. That was the range of reign of King Xerxes. The same person, King Xerxes, don't get confused. In the NIV Bible, his name appears as King Ahasuerus. He is the same person. He is called Xerxes in other sources. And so don't get confused. Ahasuerus is Xerxes, and henceforth I'll be using the word Xerxes. Now, the date of Purim, the Purim festival, is established on the 14th day of the month of Adar on the Jewish calendar. The heroes of the story in the book of Esther are Esther and her cousin Mordecai. Esther is a beautiful young Jewish orphan living in Persia, and her cousin Mordecai is the one who raised her like his own daughter. The story unfolds after King Xerxes has divorced his first wife, Queen Vashti, for neglecting his commands. Esther comes into the story as one among the young ladies listed to contest for the queen's position at the royal harem. A royal harem refers to chambers within the palace where a king's wives, concubines, and female attendants live. These women are often regarded by eunuchs. They are often guarded. They are often taken care of, or they are normally watched over like security. They have security who watch over them to make sure that everything goes well in the harem. So a royal harem refers to chambers within the palace where the king's wives, concubines, mainly female attendants live. These women are often guarded by eunuchs, and for that reason, they have a limited contact with the outside world. If you watch Igbo movies, some of their traditional movies, you can see that they portray a haram, where they have a chamber where ladies are normally, beautiful ladies are chosen to contest to be the king's wife or the heir apparent to the throne. Normally, Nigerian movies portray that very much often. Mordecai was one of the king advisors, and he coached Esther into finding favor before the king, King Xerxes. So King Xerxes developed love for Esther and made her his queen, but on her cousin's advice. Esther kept the true identity as a Jew hidden from the king for some political reasons. The story takes a sinister turn. All of a sudden, the story turned when Haman, another prominent advisor to the king, comes into the scene. Haman is wicked. Haman is a wicked and evil man, a descendant of the Amalekites, the ancient enemies of the Israelites. And you know why the hatred? You understand the reason for the hatred, why the Amalekites hate the Jews so much. You find it in Exodus chapter 17, verse 8 to 14. Exodus chapter 17, verse 8 to 14. That will explain the reason the Amalekites hate Jews. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men, and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. Verse 10, so Joshua fought the Amalekite as Moses had ordered. Aaron and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his arms, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up on one side, one on the other side, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of the Amalekite, the name of Amalek, from under heaven." Verse 15, Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." He said, because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. And the Amalekites know this story. They know the story very well. So they have a reason to hate Israel. And Haman is a descendant of an Amalekite, of the Amalekites. So no wonder Amalekite hates biblical Israel. While the king's other officials bow down to Haman, Haman has been able to maneuver his ways and has been able to use his status in the palace, has used it to influence all the big people to bow to him anytime he comes and passes by. So you see, Mordecai, for one, refuses to do so. He refuses to bow like the other king's officials. Mordecai alone refuses to do so. He refuses to bow because he bows in worship only to God. This provokes Haman to anger. So Haman devises a means to exterminate the Jewish people in revenge. He informs the king there is certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's law. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. Esther chapter 3, verse 8. So the king agreed to it. In so doing, the king has handed over the fate of the Jewish people to Haman, the wicked man, whose intention is to kill all the Jewish people. Evil intention of Haman is revealed. Mordecai finds out the evil intentions of Haman, and Mordecai persuades Esther to speak to the king for the interests of the Jewish people, her own people. This is a risk for Esther to take because anyone who comes into the king's presence without being summoned could be killed. She needs courage and bravery. Mordecai gives encouragement to his cousin with the following stirring words. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all Jews will escape, for you remain silent at this time. Relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. That is the stirring word of Mordecai speaking to his cousin Esther. So I throw the same challenge to you Ghanaian leaders, that you don't think Your position will save you if you fail to speak against social evils around you. If you remain silent, tribal wars can break out. Watch out. And you and your family may perish. Wake up and say something, Ghanaian leaders. I still throw the challenge that you Christian bishops or moderators, wake up and say something, else you will not be spared if tribal war breaks up. You may be doing your sacred duties in the cathedral, but lo and behold, gunmen may storm the chapel and point guns at you. This is not my prayer though, but wake up and say something. You imams, wake up and say something. It is not enough to share the message from the Quran during worship. Let your voice be heard. Let your voice reach out to the Ghanaians that Islam support peace. Else, bandits may trace your footsteps to the mosque and point guns at you. And every corner of you cannot have any shelter in any part of the mosque. So wake up, imams. You traditional overlords, I challenge you, wake up and say something, else tribal wars may erupt and destroy your kingdom. Else young men may come to the palace and chase you with stones and sticks like hunting for snakes. Queen Esther comes to the rescue. She calls for the Jews to fast for her 3 days as she prepares to meet the king. When this is done, I will go to the king, and though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish, Esther told her cousin. Esther chapter 4, verse 16. King Xerxes welcomes Esther. Thanks be to God. Esther then reveals the evil plot of Haman against her people. She asks the king to consider saving the lives of her country foes. Her request is taken up by the king, and indeed the Jewish people were saved. Esther chapter 8, verse 7 to 8. King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the pole he set up. Now write another decree in the king's name on behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with its ring can be revoked. So you see in verse 8, it conveys the idea that whatever comes from the king's mouth and is sealed with his ring cannot be ignored. It stays. Bang. We read from the book of Daniel that the law of the Medo-Persians, the Medo-Persian Empire, could not be changed. Once written and ratified, it cannot be changed. You will see this in Daniel chapter 6, verse 6 to 15, especially from verse 6 to verse 8. Once the Medo-Persians write their law and pass it on or ratify it, it has become a decree, and it can never be reversed. And since it is impossible for the king to rescind his edict, Mordecai and Esther must have appealed to the king to issue another decree to allow the Jews in Persia to defend themselves from their enemies. The king has to do something to make the decree which has struck the Jews ineffective. He must do something to neutralize the power of the law which has trapped the Jewish people. Thus, King Xerxes replies in verse 8, write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and seal with his ring can be revoked. So the king grants Mordecai and Esther's wish to set the Jewish community free from the destruction of Haman. And Haman is hanged on the gallows that he has prepared for Mordecai. I wonder why God put Mordecai and Esther in that place of hatred against Jews. I think God is setting an example of how he can bring a change through the bravery and faithful ones. So too, your faith in Christ and bravery can be a channel through which God can save those who are bound by Satan for destruction. That is why God has made some of you bishops, moderators, to stand for the truth and the truth alone for the salvation of the nation. That is why God has made some of you president and vice president IGPs to protect and provide the needs of your fellow Ghanaian. Esther and Mordecai took that course, and God worked in partnership with them for the salvation of souls. The Vice President Jainana Opoku-Agyeman and the President John Dramani Mahama are expected to take a similar course to bring relief to the poor and protect the vulnerables in Ghana. It is a heavy task. Nonetheless, leadership should gather courage and remain faithful to their duties. Finally, Esther and Mordecai inaugurate a festival of Purim in commemoration to the miraculous turn of events. Purim marks the time of happiness, joy, gladness, and honor to one another and gifts to the poor. Esther chapter 9, verse 22. Let me quickly read again the text, starting from Esther chapter 8, verse 9 to 17. Verse 9. At once the royal secretaries were summoned on the 23rd day of the third month, the month of Sivan. They wrote out all Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces stretching forth from India to Kush. These orders were written in the script, each province and the language of each people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, seal the dispatches with the king's signet ring and send them by mounted couriers who rode fast horses, especially bread for the king. The king's edict granted, that's verse 11, the king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. Verse 13, a copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, riding the royal horse, went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. Verse 15. When Mordecai left the king's presence, at this time when he was leaving the king's presence, out of joy, he was wearing royal garments of blue and white, and a large crown of gold and purple of fine linen. Please note the royal colors: blue, white, gold, purple. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy. Time of happiness and joy. And joy. We simcha. That is the word we are examining in the Hebrew word. We simcha. And we have seen how it relates to this politics that we read about in the book of Esther. So there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating, and many people of other nationalities became Jews because of the fear of the Jews had seized them. You see, one advice or one lesson we learn here, there's a lot of lessons, but one of them that we cannot escape us is that we should not hate any tribe in the country called Ghana. Once that is done, then it's becoming like a scene that we read from the book of Esther. There is no need for one to hate his neighbor. No need, if we read the book of Esther well. And now, I wish to leave you here, put an end to my discourse by wishing you agalliasis, by wishing you simcha in the Hebrew, agalliasis in the Greek, and simcha in Hebrew, both meaning the same, that you have a joy, an exceeding joy, overjoy, joy that flows within the soul like a river. Amen. God bless you.